Okay, so welcome along to this SLP Debate Club episode 2. We're going to be talking today about raising the profile of our game, of our players in our game, making our players superstars. The people that we've got to join us on this chat, we've got myself, Mark, and Tim G as well from SLP, shockingly, and we've also got Nate from the Rugby League in America podcast. So welcome back to the show, first of all, Nate. How are you?
I'm well. Appreciate you having me on.
No, it's great to get your perspective. You're always enthusiastic, which helps swing us Northern English people around. And Tim, we've got you as well to give us a bit of a perspective from the south of England. So Happy New Year, Tim.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Mark. And also my background as a marketing professional sometimes comes in useful and crosses over, and this is one where it definitely does.
Oh, we're going to have to stop the call, Tim. We don't want professionals in our game. It ruins,
right, okay.
It ruins like what we're trying to achieve here or not. So the trigger point for our conversation was a piece that Drew Derbyshire actually put up on the Love Rugby League opinion piece on their website just before Christmas it was, so it's taken us a while to figure out a time slot, but basically Drew's premise was that we need to make superstars in the British game. Although when I read his opinion piece, whilst it all rang fairly true, other than putting highlight reels of our young star players onto YouTube to hype them up, there was no other real suggestions made on how we turn our young talent into superstars. So we put the feelers out. We got a few views in from you lot, the audience, over Twitter, and also Tim and Nate wanted to get involved in a conversation about it. So we're going to go through that now. And Tim, I'm going to start with you, because I'm going to start with playing devil's advocate, and I'm going to ask you do we want our young players to become superstars? Is that what British League should be aiming for? Isn't one of the strengths of our game the relatability and attainability of our current star players? So do we want them to be star players? Do we want them to be superstars, sorry?
I think we do, because I think the halo effect and the added benefit to everybody of having some big well-known names is there and is enough that would drive the sport to a certain level. I think, yes, having a sport where you can go and see your players in Tesco's and whatever, and that's a strength we should be building on. And the idea that they're just one of many, and they're just like you, and that's a really strength, because Premiership footballers are in a different world, and they're in academies from 5-6 years old, and they're sort of almost factory produced. Whereas the fact that we've got sort of general, normal blokes and women that can play our sport, that's what we want, and we want to that. So I don't necessarily think, the sort of premise in your question, that they're necessarily mutually exclusive things. I think you can have both, because I think having superstar players and having names and icons people can attach to is something that drives interest in the sport. If you look back to the 80s, and if you look back, even there was a piece today about being 30 years since Jonathan Davis signed for Widnes. Now, how many rugby union fans or people that are genuinely interested in sport in general knew Jonathan Davis at that time when he went to Widnes? And how many people then discovered rugby league and came into the sport somehow on the back of that? And I think that's quite a good case study of how we could then, as someone like that, you get a well-known household name, and that then drives all sorts of interest in the game that you can then sell to them off the back.
So they're not mutually exclusive, is what you're saying, and I understand where you're coming from. Possibly our game won't ever quite generate enough income to be dealing with the kind of diva situations that, say, or another sport like my American football team right now, the Pittsburgh Steelers, are dealing with a huge fallout between their star players when they're all earning 15 to 20 million pounds a year, these people that are bitching and whining at each other. So
I once sat at the KC Stadium on the stretcher bench behind a footballer who shall remain nameless, but was refusing to sit down because there was a little bit of water on his seat. So he'd just been running around and was sweating and everything, been running around for 60, 70 minutes, refused to sit down after he was subbed because there was a little bit of water on his seat. And that was 15 years ago.
So you don't think that the heroes that are playing our sport will become divas to that extent, where the fallout might become not worth the benefits that we get from them being closely associated with us? Like you say, you can see them in the street. You know that they're not out earning you by thousands of pounds for every second compared to your annual salary. So yeah, I take your point there. Nate, where do you come in on this? Do you think it's crucial, like Tim says, to make the players become superstars? It's a way of bringing in people to the game?
So yes, I do, and so I actually 100% agree with him. And Tim, I think you're right on point. Like, I think you're spot on when it comes to having superstars in the game. I don't think that's ever bad. I think the game of rugby league in general, it's selling itself short. I think all three of us could agree that the sport itself, it's the best product that you can put over grass. Like, it's beautiful. It's awesome. Like, it's beautiful, but it's brutal. It's everything that, from a marketing dream, kind of thing. But also just from a game, it's an awesome game to watch. But there's something has to drive the game forward, and the game can only drive itself forward so much. Like, it doesn't matter if you take all the fans out of a stadium in every sport, it's still just whatever game you're playing. So you got to have something that brings that. Some sports, they generate off of their league as a whole, like, whatever. But every sport that's doing well is pushing their actual players, because people care about the human element of things. So they love the idea. Like, I love the idea that if I came to England, I could walk down the streets in Northern England and, somewhere and maybe bump into, one of the players that's playing on one of these teams, right? Like, that's awesome to me. That's really cool. But at the same time, I mean, like, there's not that many people in the world that could bump into them and know that that's who they're bumping into. And so that's one of the things I think they need to change. I think they need to find those players, identify them, and say, okay, these are the guys that without a doubt, they make sense. They can get that public eye, and they need that crossover appeal. And that's where the players can do more than the sport can. So you want that crossover guy who can be in a commercial of insert whatever, and he can get some random soccer fans to, football fans, but he can get those fans to come over and watch the game of rugby league. He can get the rugby union guy that, is like on the fence in America, and all of a sudden he pays attention, or basketball or whatever, insert whatever. But I think that would be a massive part of it. It's kind of interesting listening to you guys talk about you don't want them to get too big. You don't want them to make too much money. It's kind of funny because, I mean, like, there's a certain element of that in American sport when it comes to it. Like, yeah, I know that, like, the guy that plays on the NFL team makes a lot of – I know that the NBA player makes like $100 million more than I do in a year. He makes a lot more than me. Maybe not that much, but they make an insane amount of money more than me. But now I understand everybody's a little bit different about it. I don't care, right? Like, if they turn around tomorrow and every rugby league player makes $100 million a year, I don't actually care. I'm actually really happy for him, because, like, if I
American dream, Nate.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter, but at the same time, it matters in the sense of, like, how do I say that in a way that, like, I do care as long as I don't.
Does it then drive the sport that it becomes an aspiration thing? That if you see someone earning that much money, as a kid or even as a part, you then think, wow, if they're doing that, that's what I want to follow, because I want, my family to be involved in that, and that it becomes a dream in that way.
So, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Because if you look at American sport, so many guys, I grew up in a very football predominant area. Like, I grew up in the state of Florida, and the state of Florida is known for its high school football, college football, and all that. I mean, I can tell you right now, there were guys on my high school team that were not playing football because they cared about football, right? They were playing football because they were good at it, and they wanted to get the hell out of where they lived, and they thought they could make millions of dollars if they made it. When they're young, like, as we get a little bit older, we start to realize what money is and, like, how it can be good and how it can be bad. But when you're young, like, if somebody tells you you're going to make $1 million a year, you're pretty sure you could live forever off 1 year of $1 million. So when they're young, if that's what motivates them, let that be what motivates them to push them forward. So having those filthy rich superstars is not a bad thing when it comes to getting the younger people to aspire to work harder. It brings in more fans. Like, if they're making that much money, it means your teams are making that much money, which means the sport is benefiting.
I suppose even the point as well is at superstar level in Super League, in Rugby League, you might be able to set yourself up for a reasonable future, but you're not going to be earning those millions of pounds. That's a million miles away from where we are. But if you become a superstar, you look at the superstars that we've had before. There's many superstars of our game that kind of set themselves up as a public figure as a result of it. There's not that many, but you look at the ones that there have been. Maybe Martin Afire stands out as the biggest example, and in the points we had coming in on Twitter, Martin Afire's name gets mentioned. Yeah, it's now 20 years since Martin Afire retired from playing the game, and yet he's still held up as the last great media star of our game. Tim, just to play that sort of negative role again a little bit on what we're talking about, what do you think about the owners of the clubs, and what do you think about the role they play in all of this? Do you feel like, and maybe the administrators of the game as well to a certain extent, and not bogging ourselves too much down with the individual personalities, but do you think as a general group they're not really looking to push the game to that next level where the players might become superstars who demand more attention, more money, more power within the game? Do you think that there's an element of our own game holding itself back?
I think there's merit in that point. I've definitely heard chairmen before speak and say, to one another that we don't want the players getting the ideas above themselves. We don't want just to put money back into players' pockets, because there is an element of that. When money comes into any sport, the wages jump up, and that then takes money away from development and other clubs, because if you look at the percentage of money that it comes in that gets spent on the playing budget, it's always disproportionate to anything else. But I think there's an element of the administrators of the sport. I don't think we've had, and I don't think we have at the moment, a vision of what the sport could or should be. There isn't someone saying, if you think of in a business, you have clear strategic aims of, okay, we're going to do this, this, and this is what we are, and this is what we're not. And I think we're just too reactive in a way, certainly in our administration, of, oh, that's come along, we'll jump on it. Oh, that's come along. And you need an element of that. Don't get me wrong. You need to be able to be agile and take those opportunities, such as the Camp Nou. That's a great opportunity that's come along, and we've jumped on it and go for it. That's a really good idea. That's the good example, because that gets you in front of new people, it gets you a new audience, and it gets you existing media attention. Given how crowded the media landscape is, for example, if you're a journalist that's just having to justify your coverage budget of where you go, because don't forget, covering rugby league is an expensive business. If you think of paying for a journalist, paying for all the equipment they need, paying for the travel, it's not cheap. So if you're going back to an editor and saying, well, we've got this and it's going to be a big thing that lots of people are interested in, that's something that buys us more coverage, which then
it's just demonstrated by how few national media went to the game in Denver last year. Whereas hopefully we will see more at the game in Barcelona. Okay, so put in some of those kind of like stumbling blocks that we have on raising the profile of our game, and maybe some elements of people that don't necessarily want us to get too big for our own boots, even from within inside the game. If we do work on the premise that we do want to make our players superstars, that is the way to help us reach the next level. We don't want to just be one of those media outlets maybe that, or even just fans, because that's what we are. That's what we're talking about this, and not as a media outlet. We're talking about this as fans. We don't want to be just like those fans who say we need to market the game better, we need to do this, we need to do that, and not come up with actual solutions. That's not what the SLP community wants to be. So how do we raise their profiles? I'm going to start, guys, with some ideas we had from social media that were sent in to discuss, and we'll chat around these for a little bit and then come out of our own ideas too. So one of our other co-hosts, Tim, Alan Kale at Shoddy and Mungo, he said more ads like the Rugby League of the Extraordinary would be a start. Nate, do these ads from about 5 years ago, do they resonate with you at all? Were you aware of these?
Vaguely aware of them. They're not bad. I don't think anything's bad to give it a shot and see how it goes. Not at all.
So that was when the RFL were getting on at the time a new marketing partner, and